My 10-year-old son left for school one autumn morning and never came back. He promised he'd be home for dinner. I watched him walk away, not knowing it was the last time I'd ever see him. Days turned into weeks, then years. Hope became routine. Then, 42 years later, I saw his face on national news, and everything I believed about my family was destroyed in a single moment. Before we continue, hit the like button, subscribe, and let us know in the comments where you are watching from. I grew up in a small American town where everyone knew your name, your business, and the color of your curtains. My wife, Linda, and I built our lives on a quiet street, lined with maples that turned gold every fall. We weren't rich, but we had enough. A modest house, a steady job at the local hardware store, and 2 children who filled our home with laughter and chaos. Our son Daniel was the kind of boy who made you believe in second chances. He was bright, curious, and stubborn in the way only a 10-year-old can be. He loved baseball, comic books, and the smell of pancakes on Saturday mornings. Daniel was my shadow. He'd follow me into the garage, asking questions about every tool, every engine, every project I started and rarely finished. He wanted to know how things worked, how the world fit together. Sometimes, I'd catch him watching me with this look, like he was trying to memorize every detail, every word I said. I didn't realize then how precious those moments would become. Linda was the heart of our family. She had a laugh that could fill a room and a way of making even the worst days feel manageable. She worked as a nurse at the county clinic, and everyone in town seemed to know her. She was the one who kept us together, who made sure Daniel and his little sister, Emily, always had clean clothes, warm meals, and a sense of safety that I took for granted. Our lives were simple, predictable. Every morning, Daniel would eat his cereal at the kitchen table, swinging his legs and telling us about his dreams from the night before. Emily, just 7, would try to copy everything her big brother did, from the way he tied his shoes to the way he slung his backpack over one shoulder. I'd walk them both to the corner, watch them join the other kids waiting for the yellow school bus, and wave until the bus turned out of sight. That morning, the morning everything changed, was colder than usual. I remember the way Daniel shivered as I zipped up his jacket, the way his breath made little clouds in the air. He grinned at me, missing one of his front teeth, and said, "Don't worry, Dad. I'll be home before you know it." I ruffled his hair, told him to listen to his teacher, and watched him run down the sidewalk, his red backpack bouncing behind him. Linda was already at work, and Emily was still finishing her breakfast. I remember thinking how lucky we were, how ordinary and safe our lives felt. I had no idea that in a matter of hours, everything would unravel. The first sign that something was wrong came that afternoon. The school secretary called, her voice tight and nervous. "Mr. Carter, is Daniel home sick today?" My heart skipped. "No, he left for school this morning. Why?" There was a pause, the kind that makes your stomach drop. "He never made it to class." I tried to stay calm, telling myself there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe he'd stopped at a friend's house. Perhaps he'd gotten distracted. But as the minutes ticked by, panic set in. I called Linda at the clinic. She left work immediately, her voice trembling as she promised to meet me at home. We searched the neighborhood, calling out this name and knocking on doors. Emily clung to my hand, her eyes wide and scared. Neighbors joined the search, their faces pale with worry. The police arrived, asking questions, taking notes, promising to do everything they could. But as the sun set and the streetlights flickered on, Daniel was still missing. That night, our house felt colder than it ever had before. Linda sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of untouched tea. Emily cried herself to sleep in my arms. I stared out the window, watching the empty street, praying for a sign, a sound, anything that would bring my son home. Days passed. The police searched the woods, the river, and every abandoned building in town. Flyers with Daniel's face appeared on every telephone pole, every store window. News crews came and went, their cameras capturing our grief, our desperation. But there were no answers, no clues, just silence. Friends and family tried to comfort us, but their words felt hollow. "He'll come home," they said. "Kids wander off all the time." But I knew my son. He wasn't the kind to run away. He was careful, responsible, and always home by dinner. The not knowing was the worst part. The endless questions, the sleepless nights, the hope that refused to die. As weeks turned into months, our lives became a waiting game. Linda stopped cooking. Emily stopped asking when her brother would be home. I stopped believing in happy endings. Our family, once so close, began to drift apart, each of us lost in our own grief. But even as hope faded, I couldn't let go. I kept searching, kept asking questions, kept believing that one day Daniel would walk through the door and everything would go back to the way it was. I didn't know then that the real betrayal was still to come. I thought losing my son was the worst thing that could ever happen to me. But the truth was, the real nightmare was only just beginning. The days after Daniel disappeared blurred together, each one heavier than the last. I stopped going to work. Linda took a leave from the clinic. Our world shrank to the four walls of our house and the endless, echoing silence that filled it. The police did what they could. At least, that's what they told us. They combed the woods, questioned neighbors, checked security cameras at the gas station and the corner store. But every lead fizzled out, every hope turned to dust. I remember the first time I felt the sting of suspicion. It was a week after Daniel vanished. A detective sat across from me at our kitchen table, his notepad open, his eyes sharp. "Is there anyone who might want to hurt your family?" he asked. "Anyone Daniel was afraid of?" I shook my head, but the question lingered. I started to wonder if I'd missed something. Some sign, some warning. I replayed every conversation, every argument, every moment I'd ever raised my voice. Was there something I'd done? Something I hadn't seen? Linda and I began to drift apart, our grief pulling us in different directions. She spent hours in Daniel's room, sitting on his bed, holding his favorite baseball glove. I buried myself in the search, driving the same routes over and over, stopping at every diner, every gas station, showing Daniel's picture to anyone who would look. Emily grew quieter, her laughter fading into whispers. Our home, once filled with noise and warmth, became a mausoleum of memories. The town changed, too. At first, neighbors brought casseroles and kind words. But as the weeks dragged on, their visits grew less frequent. People avoided our eyes at the grocery store. Whispers followed us down the aisles. Maybe he ran away. Maybe the parents know more than they're saying. The rumors stung, but nothing hurt more than the empty chair at our dinner table. Months passed. The seasons changed. The flyers with Daniel's face faded in the rain, the corners curling, the ink running. The police called less often. The news crews stopped coming. The world moved on, but we couldn't. Every night, I sat by the window, watching the street, hoping for headlights, for footsteps, for a miracle. Then, one evening, a letter arrived. No return address, just my name, written in shaky, unfamiliar handwriting. I tore it open, my hands trembling. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the words scrawled in blue ink. "He's safe. Don't look for him. If you love him, let him go." I read it over and over, my mind racing. Was it a cruel prank? A ransom note? I showed it to Linda, her face pale as she read the words. We took it to the police, but they found nothing. No fingerprints, no clues. The letter became another unanswered question, another weight on my chest. After that, the phone calls started. Late at night, always from a blocked number. Sometimes there was only silence on the other end. Other times, a voice, distorted, unrecognizable, would whisper, "He's gone. Stop searching." The police traced the calls, but they led nowhere. Each one chipped away at my hope, my sanity. Linda began to change. She grew distant, her eyes hollow, her voice flat. She stopped sleeping, stopped eating. I tried to reach her, to pull her back, but she slipped further away with each passing day. Emily clung to me, her small hands gripping my arm as if she was afraid I'd disappear too. One night, I found Linda in Daniel's room, packing his clothes into a box. "We have to move on," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He's not coming back." I wanted to scream, to shake her, to tell her she was wrong. But I couldn't. I was just as lost as she was. The betrayal didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, like a shadow at the edge of my vision. I started to notice things. Money missing from my wallet, strange charges on our bank statements, Linda's late-night phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself it was just stress, just grief. But the doubts grew, gnawing at me, keeping me awake at night. Then, one afternoon, I came home early from another fruitless search. I found Linda in the kitchen, her back to me, speaking in hushed tones on the phone. She didn't hear me come in. "No, I can't tell him," she whispered. He'd never forgive me. My heart pounded in my chest. I stepped forward, and she spun around, her face flushed, her eyes wide with fear. "Who were you talking to?" I demanded. She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It's nothing. Just a friend." But I knew she was lying. I could feel it in my bones. That night, I confronted her. The argument was ugly, shouting, accusations, years of pain boiling over. She finally broke down, sobbing into her hands. "I'm sorry," she choked. "I just wanted to protect you. I thought if I kept it secret, it would all go away." "Kept what secret?" I pressed, my voice shaking. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "I got a letter, weeks before Daniel disappeared. It said he wasn't safe, that someone was watching him. I didn't tell you, because I didn't want to scare you. I thought it was just a prank, but then he was gone and I couldn't forgive myself." The room spun. I felt like the ground had opened beneath my feet. All this time, she'd been hiding something that might have changed everything. The trust we'd built over years of marriage was shattered in an instant. I stormed out of the house, the cold night air burning my lungs. I walked for hours, replaying every moment, every conversation, every missed sign. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd ever felt. Not just the loss of my son, but the loss of trust, of certainty, of the life I thought I knew. When I finally returned home, Linda was gone. She'd taken Emily and left a note on the kitchen table. "I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. I was alone. Truly, utterly alone." But as I sat in the darkness, the letter clutched in my hand. A new feeling began to take root. Anger. Determination. If no one else would fight for my son, I would. No matter what it costs me, I had lost my family, my trust, and my hope. But I wasn't done searching, not by a long shot. And what I was about to uncover would change everything I thought I knew about betrayal, justice, and revenge. The house was silent, stripped of laughter and warmth, echoing with the ghosts of what used to be. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter and Linda's notes spread before me, my hands shaking as I tried to make sense of it all. The clock on the wall ticked louder than ever, each second a reminder that time was moving forward, even if my life had come to a standstill. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's face, smiling, waving, promising to be home for dinner. I heard Linda's voice, trembling with guilt and fear. I saw Emily's wide, frightened eyes as she clung to her mother, leaving me behind. The pain was sharp, but beneath it, something else was growing. A fire, a need for answers, for justice, for revenge against whoever had torn my family apart. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't rely on the police, the neighbors, or even Linda. I had to take matters into my own hands. I started by retracing every step, every detail of the day Daniel disappeared. I made a list of everyone he'd spoken to, every place he might have gone, every possible threat, real or imagined. I called the school again, speaking to Daniel's teacher, Mrs. Harper. She remembered that morning well. "He seemed happy, normal," she said. "He was excited about the science fair. He even helped another student with her project before class." There was nothing unusual, nothing to suggest he was in danger. But as I pressed her for more, she hesitated. "There was a man outside the school that morning," she finally admitted. "I didn't recognize him. He was just standing by the fence, watching the kids. I thought he was a parent, but now, I'm not so sure." My heart pounded. Why hadn't anyone mentioned this before? I asked the police, but they brushed it off. No evidence, no witnesses, just another dead end. But I couldn't let it go. I started visiting every house on our street, asking if anyone had seen a stranger that day. Most people shook their heads, offered sympathy, and closed their doors. But Mrs. Jenkins, the widow who lived 2 houses down, paused when I described the man. "Tall, dark coat, hat pulled low?" she asked. He was parked in an old blue sedan, sat there for nearly an hour, just watching. I wrote down every detail, every scrap of information. I called the police again, demanding they check traffic cameras, but they said the footage was long gone. Frustrated, I turned to the only thing I had left, my own determination. I started keeping a journal, documenting every lead, every rumor, every late-night phone call. I drove the route Daniel would have taken to school, over and over, searching for anything I might have missed. I stopped at gas stations, diners, and even the bus depot, showing Daniel's picture, asking questions. Most people hadn't seen anything, but a trucker at the diner remembered a boy matching Daniel's description, waiting outside the bus station the morning he disappeared. He looked scared, the man said, kept glancing over his shoulder. Then a man in a dark coat came up, said something to him, and they left together. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture they painted was terrifying. Someone had been watching my son. Someone had taken him, right under our noses. And for all these years, they'd managed to stay hidden. The anger inside me grew. I thought about the letter, the phone calls, the way Linda had kept secrets, the way the police had dismissed my fears. I realized I couldn't trust anyone, not even the people closest to me. If I wanted answers, I'd have to find them myself. I started digging into our past, looking for any connection, any enemy who might have wanted to hurt us. I remembered a man named Frank Miller, a former co-worker I'd fired years ago for stealing from the hardware store. He'd threatened me, said I'd regret crossing him. I tracked him down, found him living in a run-down apartment on the edge of town. He looked older, rougher, but his eyes were still cold. "What do you want?" he growled when I showed up at his door. "I want to know if you had anything to do with my son's disappearance," I said, my voice steady despite the fear twisting in my gut. He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You think I'd waste my time on your kid? I got my own problems." He slammed the door in my face, but I saw something in his eyes, a flicker of recognition, a shadow of guilt. I didn't stop there. I started looking into anyone who might have had a grudge against me or Linda. Old friends, former co-workers, even distant relatives. I made a list, started making calls, asking questions, digging up old wounds. Most people were shocked, some were angry, but none had answers. The more I searched, the more isolated I became. The town turned its back on me, tired of my questions, my obsession. Even Emily stopped answering my calls. I was alone, but I refused to give up. I owed it to Daniel, to myself, to the family I'd lost. One night, as I sat in the darkness, staring at the letter, the phone rang. The same blocked number. I answered, my voice trembling with rage. "Stop looking," the distorted voice whispered. "You're only making it worse." I gripped the phone, my knuckles white. "Who are you? What do you want?" Silence. Then, just before the line went dead, "He's not your son anymore." The words echoed in my mind, chilling me to the bone. But instead of fear, I felt a surge of determination. Whoever had taken Daniel, whoever was behind these calls, they wanted me to give up. But I wouldn't. I couldn't. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would find the truth, no matter what it cost. I would bring my son home, or die trying. I had nothing left to lose, and that made me dangerous. The next step would take me deeper into the shadows of my own past, and closer to the truth than I'd ever dared to go. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter and my journal spread out before me, the phone still warm in my hand. The words from the call, "He's not your son anymore," echoed in my mind, twisting my grief into something sharper, something that felt like purpose. I realized then that this wasn't just about finding Daniel. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and the justice that had been stolen from my family. If the world wanted to forget, if the police wanted to close the case, then I would become my own detective, my own judge, and if I had to, my own executioner. I started with the list I'd made. Every name, every place, every rumor. I mapped out the connections, drawing lines between people who'd crossed our paths, people who might have had a reason to hurt us. I went back to the diner where the trucker had seen Daniel. I sat at the counter for hours, nursing black coffee, watching the faces that came and went. I asked the waitress about the man in the dark coat, but she just shook her head. "We get all kinds in here," she said, "but I'll keep an eye out." I left my number with her, just in case. Then I started visiting the bus station every morning, watching the crowds, looking for anyone who seemed out of place. I talked to the ticket clerks, the janitors, and the security guards. Most hadn't seen anything, but one old man remembered a boy, scared and alone, waiting by the payphones the morning Daniel disappeared. He was with a man, the janitor said. Tall, thin, wore a hat. They left together. Didn't look right to me, but I didn't want to get involved. I wrote it all down, every detail, every scrap of information. I started to see a pattern. Someone had been watching Daniel, waiting for the right moment to take him. Someone who knew our routines, our habits, the way our family worked. The more I dug, the more I realized this wasn't random. It was personal. I started to think about the letter, the phone calls, the way Linda had hidden things from me. I wondered if she knew more than she'd admitted, if she'd been protecting someone or if she'd been threatened herself. I tried calling her, but she never answered. Emily, too, had gone silent. I was truly on my own, but I wasn't helpless. I had time, I had anger, and I had nothing left to lose. I started following up on every lead, no matter how small. I tracked down Frank Miller again, this time waiting for him outside the bar where he spent most nights. When he stumbled out, I cornered him in the alley. "You know something?" I said, my voice low and steady. "Tell me what happened to my son." He sneered, but I saw the fear in his eyes. "I told you, I got nothing to do with your kid." I pressed him harder, threatening to go to the police with what I knew about his past. Finally, he broke. "All I know is there was talk. Some guy is asking around about you, about your family, said he had a job for someone who could keep their mouth shut. That's all I know, I swear. It wasn't much, but it was something." I started asking around, talking to people on the fringes, guys who worked odd jobs, who knew how to keep secrets. I learned about a man named Carter, a drifter who'd passed through town around the time Daniel disappeared. He'd been seen with a boy, matching Daniel's description, at a motel on the edge of town. I drove out there, my heart pounding. The place was run down, the paint peeling, the sign flickering in the dusk. I showed Daniel's picture to the woman at the front desk. She studied it, her eyes narrowing. "Yeah, I remember him. Quiet kid. Stayed here one night with a man. Tall, thin, wore a hat, paid cash, left early." I asked if she remembered anything else, but she just shrugged. "People come and go, but that kid, he looked scared. I wish I'd done something." I thanked her and left, my mind racing. I was getting closer. I could feel it. Whoever had taken Daniel had planned it carefully. But they'd left a trail I was determined to follow, no matter where it led. I started piecing together the timeline, matching sightings, phone calls, and rumors. I realized that the man in the dark coat had been seen in other towns, always around the time a child went missing. I called the police in those towns, but most didn't want to talk to me. One detective, though, listened. "We had a case like yours," he said. "Boy disappeared, no trace. We think it was a ring. People who take kids, move them around, change their names. Hard to catch, but not impossible." The word ring sent a chill down my spine. Was Daniel caught up in something bigger than I'd ever imagined? Was he still alive? Trapped somewhere? Waiting for me to find him? I started working with a private investigator, a woman named Marla who'd lost her own child years before. She was tough, relentless, and she believed me when no one else would. Together, we dug deeper, following the money, the phone records, the paper trail. We found connections between the man in the dark coat and a series of foster homes, adoption agencies, and even a church that had been shut down for irregularities. The deeper we went, the more dangerous it became. We started getting threats, anonymous notes left on my windshield, late-night phone calls warning us to stop. But I was past the point of fear. I wanted justice. I wanted revenge. Marla and I made a plan. We'd set a trap, use the information we'd gathered to lure the man in the dark coat out of hiding. We contacted one of his old associates, pretending to be desperate parents looking for a lost child. We arranged a meeting at a motel, just like the one where Daniel had been taken. The night of the meeting, my heart raced. I sat in the car, watching the door, waiting for the man to appear. Marla was inside, wired with a recorder, ready to get him to talk. Every second felt like an hour, every shadow a threat. Then, a car pulled up. A tall man in a dark coat stepped out, looking around nervously. He entered the motel room. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, ready to burst in if anything went wrong. Inside, Marla played her part perfectly. She asked about finding a lost child, about how the system worked. The man grew suspicious, but he started to talk about how kids could disappear, how names could be changed, how families could be erased. I listened through the earpiece, my blood boiling. This was it. This was the man who had taken my son, who had destroyed my family. I was so close to the truth, I could taste it. But just as Marla pressed for more, the man stood up, his eyes cold. "You're not who you say you are," he said. "This meeting is over." He stormed out, glancing around as he hurried to his car. I started the engine, ready to follow him, but he sped off into the night, disappearing before I could catch up. I slammed my fists against the dashboard, the frustration and rage threatening to overwhelm me. But I wasn't giving up. I was closer than ever. And now, I had a name, a face, and a plan. The man in the dark coat knew I was coming, but I was done playing by his rules. The next move would be mine, and I was ready to do whatever it took to bring my son home and make those responsible pay. I didn't sleep for days after that failed meeting. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man in the dark coat, his cold stare, the way he'd slipped through my fingers. But I wasn't the same desperate father I'd been all those years ago. I was sharper now, fueled by a need for justice that burned hotter than fear. I knew I was up against something bigger than a single man. This was a network, a web of secrets and lies that had swallowed my son and countless others. But I was ready to tear it apart, thread by thread. Marla and I regrouped, poring over every scrap of evidence we'd collected. We mapped out the man's movements, cross-referenced sightings, and dug into his known associates. We found a pattern. Every few years, he'd surface in a new town, always near a foster home or adoption agency with a history of missing children. We tracked his most recent activity to a small city 2 states over, where a private foster agency had quietly shut down after a string of complaints. We drove there together, the miles passing in tense silence. The city was bigger than our hometown, but the sense of unease was the same. We started with the agency's old office, now abandoned, its windows boarded up. Marla picked the lock, and we slipped inside, flashlights cutting through the dust and darkness. The place was a mess, papers scattered, furniture overturned, the smell of mildew thick in the air. But in the back office, we found what we were looking for: a filing cabinet, still locked. Marla worked the lock open with a hairpin, her hands steady. Inside were files, dozens of them, records of children, placements, payments. We scanned the names, searching for Daniel, for any clue that might connect him to this place. And then, there it was, a file with his name, his school photo paperclip to the front, and a new name written in red ink across the top. My hands shook as I read the details. Daniel had been placed with a family in another state, his records altered, his identity erased. The file included a contact number, an address, and a note. Special case: do not contact biological family. Rage and relief warred inside me. My son had been alive, hidden in plain sight, his life rewritten by strangers. I copied every page, every detail, and we left the office before dawn, hearts pounding with the weight of what we'd found. We called the number listed in the file, pretending to be from the agency, asking about Daniel's placement. The woman who answered was cautious, but she confirmed that a boy matching Daniel's description had lived with them for several years before running away as a teenager. He was a good kid, she said, her voice soft, but he never talked about his past. He left one night and never came back. It was another dead end, but it was also a clue. Daniel had survived. He'd escaped, and if he was out there, I was going to find him. Marla and I split up, following leads in different cities. I tracked down old friends of the foster family, people who might have seen Daniel after he ran away. Most had no idea where he'd gone, but one remembered a young man who'd worked odd jobs, kept to himself, and moved on every few months. He was always looking over his shoulder, the man said, like he was afraid someone would find him. I followed the trail from city to city, each step bringing me closer to the truth. Along the way, I started to see the cracks in the network, the people who'd profited from stolen children, the officials who'd looked the other way, the families who'd been lied to. I gathered evidence, recorded conversations, and built a case that would expose them all. But the man in the dark coat was still out there, watching, waiting. I started getting threats again. Notes slipped under my motel door, cars idling outside my window at night. Marla's car was vandalized, her tires slashed, her windows broken. We were getting too close, and they knew it. One night, as I was leaving a diner, the man himself appeared. He stepped out of the shadows, his face half hidden by his hat. "You should have stopped," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You don't know what you're dealing with." I stood my ground, my fists clenched. "I know enough. I know you took my son. I know you destroyed my family. And I know you're going to pay." He laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You think you're the first parent to come looking? You think you can stop this?" "I don't care about the others," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "I care about my son, and I'm not leaving until I get answers." He stepped closer, his eyes hard. "You want answers? Fine. Your son was special. Smart, strong, stubborn. He wouldn't break. He ran, and we let him go. But you, if you keep digging, you'll end up just like him. Lost." I stared him down, refusing to back away. I'd rather be lost than live with your kind of evil. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. But I had what I needed: a confession, a face, a trail of evidence that would bring the whole operation down. Marla and I went to the police, armed with files, recordings, and the man's confession. At first, they were skeptical, but as we laid out the evidence, their skepticism turned to shock. An investigation was launched, arrests were made, and the network began to unravel. But through it all, I kept searching for Daniel. I followed every lead, every rumor, every whisper of a young man who'd survived the system and vanished into the world. I knew he was out there, somewhere, living under a new name, carrying the scars of what had been done to him. And then, one morning, as I sat in a motel room, the TV flickered on. The headline crawled across the screen: "Unidentified man in federal custody. Possible link to decades-old missing child case." The face that appeared was older, harder, but unmistakable. It was Daniel. After 42 years, my son's face was on national news. But the story wasn't over. The world would soon learn the truth about what happened to him. And so would I. I stared at the television, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear the reporter's words. The image on the screen was grainy, but I knew that face. The jawline, the eyes, older, yes, but still my son, Daniel. The name on the news was different, but the story was unmistakable. A man with no past, arrested in a federal sting, suspected of living under a false identity for decades. The anchor's voice was clinical, detached, but every word cut through me like a blade. I called Marla, my hands shaking. She answered on the first ring. "You saw it?" she asked, her voice tight with emotion. "It's him," I whispered. "It has to be." We spent the next hours glued to the news, watching as the story unfolded. The authorities were tight-lipped, but details trickled out. Daniel had been living in Nevada, working odd jobs, keeping to himself. He'd been picked up in a sweep of suspected identity fraud cases, and when they ran his fingerprints, the system flagged a match to a missing child from decades ago. My son. The phone rang again, this time from a number I didn't recognize. It was a detective from Nevada. "Mr. Carter, we believe we have your son in custody. We need you to come out here to confirm his identity." I packed a bag in a daze, barely able to process what was happening. The drive to Nevada felt endless, every mile a blur of memories and questions. What would I say to him? Would he even want to see me? Was he the same boy I'd lost? Or had the years changed him into someone I wouldn't recognize? When I arrived at the station, the detective met me at the door. "He's agreed to see you," she said, her eyes kind but cautious. "But I have to warn you, he's different. He's been through a lot." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. She led me down a hallway, past rows of holding cells, until we reached a small interview room. Daniel sat at the table, his hands cuffed, his eyes fixed on the floor. He looked up as I entered, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. "Daniel?" I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. He stared at me, his expression unreadable. "That's not my name," he said quietly. "Not anymore." I felt the words like a punch to the gut, but I forced myself to sit down across from him. "I know, but it's still who you are to me." He looked away, his jaw clenched. "Why are you here?" I swallowed hard, searching for the right words. "Because I never stopped looking. Because you're my son. Because I need to know what happened." He was silent for a long time. Finally he spoke, his voice rough with years of silence. "I ran. I had to. They told me you were gone, that it was safer if I disappeared. I believed them. I tried to forget, but I never could." Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them away. "We never gave up on you. Your mother, she waited for you every day until the end." He flinched at that, pain flickering across his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought if I stayed away, you'd be safe." I reached across the table, my hand trembling. "You didn't have to protect us. We just wanted you home." He hesitated, then placed his hand in mine. For a moment, the years melted away, and I saw my boy again, the one who'd promised to be home for dinner, the one who'd vanished on a cold autumn morning. The authorities cleared Daniel of any wrongdoing. He was a victim, not a criminal. A child stolen, a life rewritten. The story made national headlines. Missing boy found after 42 years. Family reunited. Reporters camped outside the station, hungry for every detail. But the real story was quieter, more complicated. It was the story of a family broken by betrayal, stitched back together by the thinnest threads of hope. Daniel didn't come home right away. He needed time to heal, to remember, to figure out who he was after all those lost years. I gave him space, but I never let him forget that he was loved, that he still had a place in our family. The network that had taken him was exposed, its leaders arrested, its secrets dragged into the light. Justice, after so many years, was finally served. The people who had profited from our pain faced the consequences of their actions. The town that had once turned its back on us now reached out with apologies, with sympathy, with offers of help. But I knew better than to trust too easily. Some wounds never fully heal. Linda never returned. Emily, grown now, reached out after seeing the news. Our reunion was awkward, tentative, but it was a start. We talked about Daniel, about the years we'd lost, about the future we might still have. I spent long nights sitting on the porch, staring at the stars, thinking about everything that had happened. The pain, the anger, the endless search. It had all led to this moment. I realized that revenge hadn't brought me peace. Justice hadn't erased the years of grief. But seeing my son again, hearing his voice, knowing he was alive, that was enough. Daniel and I met for coffee one morning, months after his release. He was quieter now, older in ways that had nothing to do with age. But as we talked, I saw flashes of the boy he'd been. The curiosity, the stubbornness, the kindness. We talked about the past, about the people who'd hurt us, about the future we might still build. "I don't know if I can ever go back," he said, his voice soft. "You don't have to," I replied. "You just have to move forward." "We both do," he nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. For the first time in decades, I felt hope. Real hope. Not the desperate kind that keeps you awake at night, but the quiet kind that lets you breathe again. The world moved on, as it always does. The headlines faded, the reporters left, the town returned to its routines. But for me, everything had changed. I'd lost everything. My home, my marriage, my sense of self. But I'd found my son. And in the end, that was all that mattered. If you've ever loved someone so much it hurt, if you've ever lost hope and found it again, then you know what I mean. Family isn't just blood. It's the people who never stop searching, never stop believing, never stop loving, even when the world tells them to give up. That's my story. That's our story. And if you're still listening, if you're still hoping, don't give up. Sometimes, even after 42 years, miracles can happen. But as I sat on my porch that night, watching the stars, I realized there was one last truth I needed to face. One final secret that would change everything I thought I knew about forgiveness, family, and the price of justice. The world outside my window was quiet, the kind of silence that settles after a storm. I sat on the porch, the old swing creaking beneath me, a mug of coffee cooling in my hands. Daniel's return had filled the house with a new kind of energy, hopeful, but fragile. We were both learning how to exist in the same space again, how to speak without flinching, how to trust that the worst was finally behind us. But even as we tried to move forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. There was a question that haunted me, a shadow that lingered in the corners of every conversation. Why? Why had Daniel been taken? Why had he never tried to reach out, even after he'd escaped? Why had the people who were supposed to protect us failed so completely? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned the color of old bruises, Daniel joined me on the porch. He sat beside me, silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the fading light. "Dad," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's something I need to tell you, something I've never told anyone." I turned to him, my heart pounding. "You can tell me anything, son. You know that," he nodded, his hands twisting in his lap. "When I was taken, they told me you and Mom were dead. They said there was an accident, that I was alone. I believed them. For years I believed them. That's why I never tried to find you. I thought there was nothing left to go back to." The words hit me like a blow. I reached for his hand, gripping it tight. "We never stopped looking for you. Not for a single day." He swallowed hard, tears shining in his eyes. "I know that now. But back then, I was just a scared kid. I did what they told me. I changed my name and I moved from place to place. When I finally realized it was all a lie, I was too afraid to reach out. I thought you'd moved on, that you'd forgotten me. I shook my head, my own eyes burning. Never, not for a second. He looked at me, his expression raw and vulnerable. I'm sorry, Dad, for everything. For not trying harder, for believing them, for letting so much time slip away. I pulled him into a hug, holding him tight. None of this was your fault. You were a child. They took everything from you. But they couldn't take you from my heart. We sat like that for a long time, the weight of years lifting, replaced by something lighter, something like forgiveness. In the days that followed, Daniel began to open up more. He told me about the places he'd lived, the people he'd met, the moments of kindness that had kept him going. He spoke of the nightmares, the fear, the loneliness, but he also spoke of the strength he'd found, the resilience that had carried him through the darkest times. I realized then that revenge and justice had their place, but they weren't enough. What mattered most was healing, finding a way to live with the scars, to build something new from the wreckage. Emily came to visit, her own wounds still fresh. The three of us sat together, sharing stories, piecing together the years we'd lost. There were awkward silences, moments of anger and regret, but there was also laughter. Tentative at first, then stronger, as if we were remembering how to be a family. The town, once so quick to judge, now watched us with a mix of curiosity and respect. Some people apologized for their silence, their suspicion. Others kept their distance, unsure how to approach a story so full of pain and redemption. I didn't blame them. Grief makes strangers of us all. One afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address, just my name written in careful script. Inside was a single sheet of paper. You found him. I never thought you would. I'm sorry for everything. I hope you both find peace. There was no signature, but I knew who it was from. The man in the dark coat, the architect of our suffering. For a moment, I felt the old anger rise, the urge to hunt him down, to demand answers. But then I let it go. He was a ghost now, a shadow from another life. I had my son back. That was enough. Daniel and I spent more time together, rebuilding our relationship one day at a time. We went fishing at the old lake, fixed up the house, and watched baseball games on TV. The world had changed, but some things remained the same. One night, as we sat on the porch watching the stars, Daniel turned to me. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" he asked. I thought about it for a long moment. Sometimes, but if things had been different, we might not be here now. We might not have learned how strong we really are. He smiled, a real smile, the kind I hadn't seen since he was a boy. "I'm glad you never gave up on me." "I never will," I said. That's what family does. The pain of the past would never fully disappear. The scars would always be there, reminders of what we'd lost. But we'd found something, too, something stronger than grief, stronger than betrayal. We'd found forgiveness. We'd found each other. As the seasons changed and the world moved on, I realized there was one last thing I needed to do. A final act of closure, not just for me, but for every parent still searching, still hoping, still waiting for justice. The years that followed were quieter, but not empty. Daniel and I learned to live with the echoes of the past, to let the pain shape us without letting it define us. Emily became a regular part of our lives again, and though Linda never returned, her memory lingered in the way we set the table, the stories we told, the love we tried to show each other every day. I started volunteering with organizations that help families of missing children. I spoke at town halls, schools, and support groups, sharing our story. Not just the pain, but the hope, the fight, the long road to justice. I wanted other parents to know they weren't alone, that sometimes, even after decades, the impossible could happen. That sometimes justice is slow, but it does come. Daniel found his own way to give back. He worked with counselors, helping other survivors find their voices, their strength. He told me once, "If I can help just one kid feel less alone, it's worth it." I couldn't have been prouder. We never forgot what was taken from us, but we also never forgot what we found. Forgiveness, resilience, and the unbreakable bond of family. The world kept turning. The seasons kept changing. But we faced each new day together, stronger for all we'd endured. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to our story. If you've ever felt lost, betrayed, or broken by family drama, know that you're not alone. There is hope, even in the darkest places. There is justice, even if it takes a lifetime. And there is always a way forward, no matter how impossible it seems. If this story moved you, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps more people find these stories of survival, justice, and family. And if you're still searching for your own answers, don't give up. Sometimes, the miracle you're waiting for is just around the corner. Thank you for being part of our journey. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.